You're listening to Arsenal Pass, a flesh and blood podcast for players by players. And all about strategy, leveling up, and the latest news in the world of Wraith. Welcome to Arsenal Pass.
Welcome back for episode 7 of Arsenal Pass. I'm Brendan Patrick, joined always by calling champion Hayden Dale. And on this episode, we're going to be talking about Classic Constructed. We got a glimpse of the upcoming meta this weekend when Dystar Games out of New Zealand's held a winning case event. There's some really powerful interactions on display, both with Shane and Prism having strong showings.
That's right, Brendan. And you know what? Speaking of Prism, we're actually joined today by a player that piloted Prism for a few rounds on camera in that event, and eventually taking out second place. None other than Dan Mackay. Dan, welcome. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Pleasure to be here.
For sure. So let's just get right into it. Dan, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? What's sort of your origin story, per se? How did you get into Flesh and Blood? Did you play anything before it? And both Hayden and I, we watched the Dystar event. We're really impressed, and we enjoyed watching you play Prism at that event. So also just kind of want to get your quick thoughts on how Monarch is shaping up the meta and just what the general landscape looks like.
Well, I guess the short version of my origin story is that I played Magic for years and years and years and years. That's how I met Hayden, and I, absolutely loved that. But there was just, a really rough scaling back of events and not a lot to actually play. And then Jason Long was playing a Flesh and Blood event, and I was kind of there as well. And I was like, I don't know about this game. It involves too much attacking. And then he showed me Wizard, and I was like, this might be for me after all. This looks pretty cool. And then I've been playing since then, basically. In terms of the Monarch meta, I mean, I don't really know, but it feels really cool in that it feels like a lot of the older decks are having to adjust their strategies a lot, and it's really shifting. The introduction of Chain and Prism, especially, I feel like they're really shifting the meta in a lot of interesting ways, which is really cool. Really cool to see.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. Go ahead, Hayden.
Yeah, I was just going to ask Dan, just for our audience, how long have you been playing Flesh and Blood? When did you actually pick up the game? Because my understanding is it's not been very long.
So I started playing a month before last year's Nationals, so whenever that was, sort of, later half of the year. And I played like an absolute demon in order to qualify for that Nationals, and then did really badly because I was quite bad. But yeah, it's not been all that long.
and
Yeah,
for those that may not know as well, Dan is actually a reigning Magic the Gathering national champion for New Zealand. Partly, obviously, because he won it, and partly now that there's no more Magic Nationals. You get to keep that title.
I had no idea about that, Hayden. That's actually hilarious. But yeah, let's just go ahead and head into our main, our first segment of the pod, which is just going to be This Week in Fab. So we obviously know you played the Dystar event, but outside of that, have you been playing any other events, maybe at locals or online? What have you been up to, Dan?
I played an Armory event at one of my local game stores, there's a few now, last night, and that was pretty fun. We did a Monarch draft, and I got to play Jason Long and the Bolton Mirror in the finals, which was pretty fun. Apart from that, just lots of Classic Constructed testing, trying to iron out lists and stuff.
Yeah, the draft format is super interesting. Obviously, we have those callings coming up, so something to prepare for there. Will you be attending at least the New Zealand calling, or maybe both?
I'm definitely attending New Zealand calling. I'm actually staying with Hayden Dale, but I probably won't be attending the Australian calling at this stage.
Mm-hmm. So Hayden might have a chance to win that Australian one then, eh?
Go take my ages.
What about you, Hayden? What have you been playing?
Yeah, similarly for me, a bit more limited testing this week, which has been good after 2 pretty busy weeks of not getting to play as much Fab as I would like. I managed to get in a couple of drafts this week, which is awesome. Drafted a Prism deck the other day on Tuesday night. Managed to get a draft in and play a Prism deck, which is quite nice. Few bits of sealed here and there, and then play some Classic Constructed this week as well. So there's the 2 sealed callings, limited callings, but there's also PTI events at those. So just preparing just in case I don't make the day 2. Always got to be prepared. So playing a bit of Classic Constructed, and then we lead into presumably a Road to National season very soon, which is going to be Classic Constructed. So just trying to work out that meta and what's happening there. Yeah, what about yourself, Brennan?
Yeah, so not much for me in terms of actual events, but obviously just keep my testing pretty consistent. We've sort of moved over to Classic Constructed. I think the assumption over here is that we might be included in that national season, over here in the United States. So definitely prepping. I just want to have all the bases covered. I think that it's probably the best place to be putting our time right now. So kind of switching from Blitz over to Classic Constructed. Other than that, I did actually get to do a draft last Friday, but it was a virtual draft. Pretty funny story. So it was a lot of, kind of more popular players in the North American scene. And we did it on a simulator, but what was funny is that we had 8 people. There was 1 Levia drafter, 1 Shane drafter, 1 Prism drafter, and 5 Boltons. So that's North American flesh and blood for you.
It's the Warrior fan base.
Yeah, I was just blown away. I could not. I had like 40 playable cards in my Levia deck. It was hilarious.
I mean, that's insane. In our first draft, we had 10 players, 1 Bolton.
I know, it's great. I just wonder, I was confused at the beginning because we paired it up in Gem, and I had like 5 round 1 drops, and I was like, what the heck? Why would people come to this and just drop? And apparently they all had these cracked Bobo Bolton decks, apparently.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I guess move away from that. Hayden, why don't you take us into the news for this?
Yep, so the news this week. So we spoke about Skirmish Season 2 last week, and in fact, the season kicked off this past weekend with a few events, predominantly in North America, I believe. Saw some results come up there, so that was great to see. I think mostly limited for the first few, and it looks like we're going to be ramping up with online events starting this week into the next 4 weeks. So yeah, if you are still looking to get into some Skirmish events either locally, you can check out fabtcg.com and look at the locator for events to head to your local events. And if you're looking for online events, they're also on there, and they'll specify that they're online. And I believe, Brendan, as well, if you go to the Fab Discord, you can find a list of all those online events. Is that correct?
Yep, the Fab Discord does have a Google Sheet that is pinned that lists all the online events. I think that every single one on there is probably sold out by now. But if you are looking to get into online events, that's going to be your best resource. It's just to kind of stick to that sheet and look for any updates, because they tend to sell out in around 8 hours, which is crazy. It's like signing up for these things is like a part-time job. But I do know that there is another big online one that hasn't been posted yet, but will. And I believe that's going to be Deck Edge. And that will be on the 27th. So it's going to be one of the last skirmishes. And I'll actually be casting and streaming that one with Dante Delfico, my partner from the Gauntlet. So it should be pretty exciting.
Nice. Look forward to seeing that. And then as well, so Channel 5 will have their skirmish coming up. I don't think entries have opened for that one. It would be an online skirmish again. So once we have entry details for that, we'll let you guys know. This can be last weekend of the season though. Moving on, we're just a week out now from the callings, the start of the first of the 2 Monarch Limited callings that we have confirmed. So Auckland kicks off basically by the time this podcast is out a week from now, and Melbourne the following week. Brennan, you looking forward to? You gonna be watching along with the coverage in Auckland? Are you looking forward to it?
Yeah, so I had a lot planned for these callings to kind of just totally bro out with a bunch of friends and group watch them and all of that. But then I realized that I have a local skirmish at Reaper, which is kind of like my OG store, right? Started in 2019 with them on that day. So I have to go to that. I'm sure I'm going to have it on my phone, and my opponent's just going to have to, they're just going to have to deal with me watching it. But yeah, super excited to watch the New Zealand one. And very excited for the Melbourne one for other reasons that I still can't talk about yet. But we'll get there eventually, maybe on the day of. But I mean, I honestly can't put into words how happy I am that there's finally coverage for Flesh and Blood Limited events. I think it was a great crime that we didn't have it back in the early days. So I'm super hyped.
Yeah, and Dan, you're obviously going to be heading up to Auckland as we spoke about. You excited? Do you feel ready, prepared?
I mean, I don't feel ready or prepared, but I'm certainly excited. Yeah, I think it's going to be really, really cool. The only calling I've been to was an amazing event, heaps and heaps of people, really amazing prizes, really amazing games being played, and I'm really excited to do that again.
Sweet, I bet. Cool. Brennan, anything else in the news this week?
Yeah, I just want to quickly mention that Hayden and I have a new video, or a couple new videos, up on Channel Fireball at this time. Most notably is our recent Prism versus Bolton sealed deck So go check that out if you're interested. It was a very, very close game. And we actually see like a lot of really cool concepts on display, especially in the final few turns. And with that, if you are shopping on Channel Fireball, we do have an affiliate code, which is Arsenal Pass. So the name of the podcast, just Arsenal Pass with no space in between. So if you're shopping on Channel Fireball already, if you want to plug that in, it always helps us out.
100%. Cool. That's the news this week. Moving on to our second week of the correspondence section. We've got another question from a listener this week. And Brennan, our question this week, and I'm going to throw this to you as well, Dan. We'd love to hear your input on this. So actually this comes from one of my locals, Fu, from right here in Sydney, Australia. He's a bit of a Kano enthusiast, you know, a good player who's recently picked up the game, I think end of last year. And, you know, he's asked us, what are the best ways to avoid tournament fatigue? So pretty straightforward question there. And you know what, Dan, since you're our guest, I'm going to ask you first. What are the best ways to avoid tournament fatigue? I know you're a player who's played numerous multi-day events, Grand Prix, and Magic national championships. You've played a calling before. You've played a nationals. What are your ways to avoid tournament fatigue?
So by tournament fatigue, I assume you mean like sort of getting worse as the day goes on.
Yeah, getting tired. You know, how do you stay at your peak performance throughout the full 1 or 2 days of an event?
I mean, I'm not sure I'm the right person to ask, because last time I played a calling, I tournament fatigued myself out of the top 8. I mean, I completely threw my game against Jacob like a complete chump, and just, flubbed my combo. So, yeah, I mean, if someone's got some tips on avoiding tournament fatigue, I could probably benefit from it, I'll tell you what.
Maybe we can... Is there anything, in retrospect then, is there anything you might have done to maybe try and avoid that fatigue? Like things you think you could have done better, or steps you could have taken to mitigate it?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. What I feel like I wish I could have done, and what I feel like hopefully I'll do next time, and what I will do next time, is just take things a little bit slower when you're going for your kill turns, when you're about to execute on your plans. Just take a step back. You've got plenty of time, especially in Blitz. Rounds are 30 minutes long, games take maybe 10. So just take a little bit of time to just go, okay, let me just math this out quickly, rather than just trying to sort of play it through quickly on autopilot or whatever. That's what I would have done.
Yeah, and when you say that, you obviously, for those that might have seen Dan's games on the weekend, or if not on the Dice Shark live coverage event, Dan's a pretty pacey player. He tends to play pretty quickly, but you're saying on those key turns, just take you want to take a little bit more time. You're not saying every turn, you're saying, but those key turns.
Yeah, just on those turns where you're really, where it matters the most. Just take a breather, go, okay, let me just double think some of these choices. Let me just, or rethink some of these choices, just make sure I've mathed this out correctly, and that I'm not, playing quite as hastily as I was in maybe some of those games versus Kale.
Trying to play at Kale's pace.
Yeah, oh man, do you remember? I mean, that just reminds me of Kale and Jacob Pearson's game from the Calling Blitz.
Yeah.
Just like you remember that, Hayden, trying to commentate that was like a joke because they played so fast.
I felt like I was a trackside commentator, but yeah. People say snail's pace, and then the direct opposite of that is Kale's pace. Is what I always say when it comes to play pace. So no, Kale, very very good player, and plays with intent and pace, which is actually fantastic for the game. All right, Brendan. But other than that, what about yourself? Any ways to avoid tournament fatigue in your experience?
Yeah. So I mean, Sasha and I had a sort of an inside joke from the first constructed calling, which was just cold cuts and bananas. So the story was like we were playing Drone of Brutality Controlled Ninja, probably the slowest deck in existence. So we basically had 60-minute rounds for what ended up being 14-15 hour tournament. And it was funny because we didn't pack any food. We had some bananas and then these cold cuts, so turkey meat, and then 4 or 5 hours in the tournament it was just warm. Honestly, I would just between rounds, I was just going in and just pounding bananas and this this processed meat. But for real, I totally agree with Dan with taking it slow on the turns that matter, but also just I don't know. I like to walk around a lot. I like to I try just not to be stagnant and to I don't know, just not let myself get kind of lulled to sleep, which I think can happen at some of these longer events. And it's like an uphill battle too, because your rounds tend to get harder and harder throughout Swiss, and obviously top 8 as well. So you just have to be, more and more on, where your body's doing the absolute opposite of that. But yeah, it's just kind of, I don't know, focusing on why you're there, what your goal is, and then just relying on you're testing, right? Like you know this deck, you know it, like you know what you're trying to do, and just kind of sit on your principles, and use that to take you to victory, right?
Yep. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think there's two pieces for me. One is preparation, and one is mindset. I think, and the second piece you talked about, I think, falls into my category of mindset, right? Which is if you've tested and you've played games and you have these known principles, right? Like you say, if it's whether it be a particular matchup and you know that there's a way you want to play that matchup, and it doesn't really change too much. Don't overthink it. Don't like Dan said. On the key turns that you need to step back and work out have you taken the right line here, or are you about to take a line that's going to define the game? Fine, but if it's pretty standard, if it's the matchup that you've tested and know, play the way that you should, and don't overthink it too much. The other and it just saves you energy, right? That just saves you from expending energy throughout the day as much, because you're not overthinking things and rethinking pretty easy and common things. You're just focusing on the big stuff. And the other piece for me is like preparation. Like Brendan, you said about the bananas and cold cuts. I always make sure I come with water, with snacks, with a plan of what I'm going to do for lunch. If there's going to be a lunch break or there's not going to be a lunch break, I'm going to make sure I have some food with me. Some proper like sustenance food as well. Because I don't want to be thinking about it during the event. I don't want to be like in the middle of a game thinking like I'm so hungry. Like how am I going to get food after this game? I just want to be like, okay, I'm hungry, but I'm going to eat after this game, and I've got it sorted, and just keep playing my game and focus on that. And just it's really tough. Sometimes these events they'll roll round to round, and you don't get breaks, and it all goes really fast. So just get up, take a quick walk. If you've finished your match, 10-15 minutes early, like set a timer for 10-15 minutes and just go for a little walk outside or something, get some fresh air. I think it's important to try and break up the day. That's kind of my view on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that there's, if we're talking about kind of eating and nutrition slightly during these tournaments, I think there's a big kind of trap that a lot of people fall into, or like a new mistake, which is, I don't know, eating like a pizza or something that gets delivered. I think that the last thing you want to do, kind of like in between rounds, you have 15 minutes, is scarf down like 4 to 5 slices of pizza and just totally food come out in some of your most important matches. I know for me, like I try to just completely lay off the carbs and just stay with water, protein, and like light stuff like bananas, right? But and if you go and get that mid tournament like Wendy's or McDonald's, oof, it depends what you can tolerate, but it's heavy.
Yeah, it depends what you. I like some slow release carbs, so it depends what you know.
Can I just add in another like massive thing you can do is obviously if you've got like friends there, that can be like a big bonus, because then when you're between rounds, you're hanging out with your friends, you're chatting with your friends, and it's way easier to stay energized doing that than it is if you're just kind of like having to just kind of wander around. And it means that if you're playing a slower deck, you can send one of them on a food run.
Yeah, good point. Absolutely. I also like that, and I've had this experience before with people like yourself, Dan. If I go to an event and maybe I lose an early round and I'm starting to get a little bit down, I think having friends there to take your mind off of it after a round is actually great. You're not thinking about that last game and dwelling on it. And then you can get a little bit of a pep talk if you need, don't worry about the last match, think about the next one. Let's just, get into it and keep going. And, just because you're X1 or something doesn't mean you can't day 2 or top 8 or whatever it might be. So 100%.
Yeah, I've definitely had that experience too. This is a slight tangent, but I don't think it's too much on. And at the last calling, Jason lost his first round because he forgot how to play the wizard mirror, and he like came up to me after round 1 and he's like, "Look, wait, I've forgotten how to play this mirror," and I was like, "So have I. Let's go and test in the corner, and get in like 3 or 4 games before the next round starts." Okay, now we know the wizard mirror. Now we can win it.
That's a great story. That's perfect. What a way to do it.
Jason Long is, just quickly before I head into the main topic of the pod, Jason Long is probably one of my favorite characters in Flesh and Blood. I would say players, but just like the way he his reactions when he plays is just some of my favorite things to watch. Like my little nickname for him is Jason Pokerface Long, because he just totally wears it, especially when he plays Kano. I remember those games from the calling, just like totally showing kind of that stress while he was going for those OTK combos.
Yeah, but then pulling them out.
Oh yeah, I know. Then pulling them out, like we saw. I remember the blue snapback. I mean, he's an incredible player. The guy literally shows up every calling he shows up to. He just top 8s, always in his marquee shorts and sandals. There's Jason Long in the top 8 picture. Like that he's one of my favorite players. I think he's gonna go super far in this game. But anyway, heading into the main topic of the pod. We are going to be talking about Classic Constructed, but we're going to be switching up a bit. I'm going to be asking the questions. We have both Hayden and, of course, Dan on the pod. Dan, coming off a big performance from, a higher level Classic Constructed event. So I'm just going to go ahead and dive into these questions. Firstly with you, Dan, just want to talk about your preparation. What was your pre-tournament process like?
So I didn't get nearly as many games in as I wanted. Basically, I just sort of, tried to find a couple on Discord, and then the night before, we were like just trying to find any time we could. So we like left our city, which is like 4 hours from the event, at like 5 p.m. And then we were like, stopping at KFC and, can we squeeze in a game of Classic Constructed before our food arrives? And then, get to the Airbnb. Okay, we need to play some games. I was actually, I was on Brute, like, basically until that night, because Jason had been absolutely crushing me with Brute against Prism, and I was like, I don't think I can win this matchup. But then we were testing Brute against Chain, and that felt pretty bad for old Rhinar. And I just kind of felt like Rhinar wasn't going to be as represented as Chain, so I got onto Prism pretty much the night before, after like 2 games of Brute versus Chain, and then I was just kind of, tinkering cards.
Yeah, I think that literally leads into what my next question was, which was like, how did you end up on Prism, and was there anything else considering? I know you mentioned that Jason was playing Shane. Were you considering piloting Shane, or were you kind of in between Brute or Prism?
I would have loved to have piloted Shane. So me and Jason were both on Brute until he played Chain against Brute. And then he was still not necessarily on Chain until the morning of. He's like, we were driving into the event, and he was going, "Oh, should I play Chain?" I was going, "Look, if you don't play Chain, I'm going to take your deck and play it. So you need, you should, right?" And he didn't have any of the legendaries, so like, I came into the venue and went, "Okay, does anyone have, Carrion Husk, Eclipse, Grasp of the Arknight?" And someone immediately said, "Yeah, I have all of them. Do you need them?" Yeah, that'd be nice, thank you.
That's crazy. So also Hayden, just want to circle back to you as well. Have you done any Classic Constructed testing yourself? I know you watched the event like I did, and there was a ton to learn. But have you gotten your hands on playing any games?
Pretty minimal, to be honest. It's been, for me, more discussion, looking at more the theory side, having some conversations with the likes of Dan, who we've got on today, around the format. I played a few games actually this week for the first time. So up until this past weekend, I hadn't played any games of Classic Constructed with Monarchs. But since then, played a few games, have had a look at heroes like Bolton, like Chain, like Bravo, like Prism. So yeah, just trying to get my head into it a little bit more now. But so far, it's been more from definitely a theory base than an actual practicality of playing games.
Mm-hmm. And before we get into like the nitty gritty of the questions, Dan, just tell me about the tournament, just kind of from a macro perspective. Was the meta turnout what you expected? Did your deck perform like you planned it to? And were there any kind of like interesting moments that struck out?
I mean, yeah, so I wasn't really sure what to expect from the meta. It was more kind of old heroes than I was expecting. I think maybe a lot of people either just didn't have like time to build up a new hero and test it, or maybe they didn't have the cards yet. But yeah, quite a lot of ninja, quite a lot of warrior, more so than I would have maybe expected. Yeah, my deck performed, I mean, with the exception of the last round, performed ideally basically the whole tournament, and I got like I didn't get perfect pairings, like Guardian's not great for me, but I never saw a Brute, and that's kind of what I was trying to dodge the whole tournament long. So yeah, I felt like I got pretty lucky. There was one standout. Actually, there was a bunch of standout moments, but I'm sure we'll cover a few. There was one where I was playing against a ninja opponent, and he let me go second, and on my first turn I attacked for 30. So that was a pretty good moment.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds like that's what I've been thinking too with Prism, and just these new heroes kind of in general. So like, if we'll get into this in more detail, but if we think about like a class that was popular in a previous meta, like Mech Control, it seems like you can get quite punished for not having a proactive game plan that's going to attack your opponent's hand. Because Prism just seems like they can just hit you for 15 or like you said, like 30, like every turn. It's a lot.
Proper shenanigans, really, isn't it?
Yeah. But Dan, why don't you go ahead and talk me through your deck building process with Prism? So I'm looking at your list right now, and I see there's no Phantasmifies, there's no Spears of Surreality. So it looks like you're pretty committed to like an aura game plan with probably a sub theme of mid range using those yellow heralds to go again. So just walk me through that kind of that deck profile a bit and why you opted to focus more on the auras and maybe not play the spears and the Phantasmifies and things like that.
So I don't think I was focusing more on the auras. I mean, I brought them in against Guardian, and I don't think I had them in any other matchup in that tournament. So, with the exception of Arclight Sentinel, which is a chain and other decks potentially.
Yeah, so I think I was a little biased because I watched both your games versus Chaos. So I just assume you're playing the auras versus everything. But so yeah, what was your deck's main strategy? Which is try to come in with a lot of damage using the go again off of Luminaris and present multiple heralds per turn?
Yeah, basically I was trying to have pretty much all of my turns be pitch a yellow, come in with herald hits, pitch a blue, 4 resources, make a soul, come in with soul, come in with another herald, right? So that was what I was trying to do more or less every turn. I mean, things like Phantasmify, basically that they block for 2 and they're a bit awkward and they're not light, so you can't use them with Genesis and you can't use them effectively with your Vestige of Soul when you want to. So, I mean, that's the reason I didn't play that, and the Spear's kind of similar. Most of my cards have Go Again anyway, so like paying 1 for 5 and it being a red is kind of bad because like Warden Herald I can pay 1 for 6 and it's a yellow.
Yeah. Makes sense, yeah. And go ahead, Hayden.
I was going to say that's a good point. Yeah, I hadn't really thought about it that way in terms of
using... when you put it that way, it kind of stands out. You're like, huh.
I have a question on a couple of cards if we're at that stage, Brennan.
Go for it.
How are cards? I see a lot of 2-ofs in your deck, Dan. Is that around not being super certain of numbers, or some cards felt okay, but you only wanted to draw one of them? I'm thinking about cards like Pummel, Springboard Somersault, Blinding Beam.
So there's a combination of things. So Springboard Somersault is because I absolutely hate Springboard Somersault, and I can't bring myself to play 3 of it. And Blinding Beam, I mean, I put a couple of them in there for Brute. I never played Brute, so I didn't actually play them in the tournament. I can now confirm, having done some testing, they're terrible. I'm getting them out of my deck. Pummels I kind of wasn't that sure on, but after playing them, they were fantastic. I kind of want to find a spot for a third one. So, I mean, most of it was just that my deck wasn't very tuned, and that I was just kind of like, putting cards in literally the morning of. I mean, one of the cards in the deck that actually really overperformed, I put in at the event, just before I wrote my deck list. I was like, I think I want to try out one of these Ode to Wrath, right?
Oh, yeah, I see the one up there, yeah.
That's cool. That's such a great story about prepping for an event in short space of time, but using a lot of, I guess, theory or what you think you want to see based on certain matchups. Like the Pummels, like the Ode to Wrath, like the Blinding Beams for Brute, for instance, and then going away and tweaking. Did you have any card, if you were to say, this was the standout of my deck of the weekend, was there one card that you were so impressed with, you think the card is so powerful and is a big reason to play Prism in the new Classic Constructor format?
Yeah, I mean, Herald of Erudition, that card's completely broken. I mean, I said before I attacked for 30 on turn 1, it was because I got a Herald of Erudition in, and then I drew another one, and then that one connected, and then, I completely took over the game. He went to 16 on the first turn. There's not much coming back from that.
Wow.
Yeah. And Hayden, quickly, I also want to get your thoughts and chime in as well, Dan. What kind of archetypes do you think exist for Prism and Classic Constructed? Do you think that the sort of mid-range build that you had here with a lot of yellow lines is the only one, or is there a build that is more committed to the auras, right? Like thinking, what is it? Prismatic Shield, I think, is the instant. Maybe Iris of Reality, things like that. And is there also a build that maybe runs those Spears of Surreality?
Yeah, maybe I'll kick this off, and then Dan can correct me with his latest Prism testing, what he's found so far. But I think there's a few different archetypes potentially with what you can do in Prism and Classic Constructed. I think Prismatic Shield is a pretty powerful card. Prismatic Shield Red. I think there is a more pure control build out there. I don't know if that's going to be something that you want to use in this format, given just how much damage output decks can produce. I also think there's a more Phantasm style build, with you spoke about Spears of Surreality and Phantasmify, and there's some powerful attack actions. We see Command and Conquer in Dan's deck. There are some ways to, with something like potentially Phantasmify, to make these attacks even scarier. So I think there's a pretty aggressive deck out there as well. And then I feel like maybe Dan, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like yours is a bit of a hybrid of that in some ways. It can produce lots of big damage, but also has this kind of switch plan to a bit more of a auras to try and get them down early and force your opponent to make some tough decisions around how they're going to attack your game plan.
Yeah, I mean, my first Prism list was a lot more blue, and a lot less focusing on Luminaris. I was using Iris of Reality a lot more, and that kind of build, even Spears of Surreality is potentially a lot better, because if you're not necessarily getting the go again off your Luminaris all the time, maybe what you want is to pitch a blue, which you have a lot of, come in with Spears, and then come with Herald, which is quite a good 3-card hand. So yeah, I mean, absolutely, there are lots of different ways of building that. I haven't actually tried red Prismatic Shield yet. So, or Phantasma, whatever the card's called.
Prismatic Shield. Yeah.
I keep calling my shields Soul Shields, which is really wrong. So yeah, I mean, I haven't really tried it yet, but yeah, there are definitely a lot of ways of building it. I would say mine's a little bit bluer than what I've seen in quite a lot of other people's lists. But I mean, whether that's right or not, only testing will really bear out.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And I guess I'll just start kind of going down the list here. There's a few things that I just want you to kind of explain and shed light on, Dan. But first, let's start with Fyendal Spring Tunic or Vestige of Soul.
Yeah, so both. Basically, I think I quite liked the Vestige when I was not on an aura plane. When I was on the pitch yellow, come in with a 2 attack, pitch blue, make a shield, come in with another 2 attack. That's quite a good hand. It's pretty easy to have. And basically, if you're hitting a lot with your heralds, I think the Vestige is a bit better. When you're trying to play your auras more, I think the Tunic is better, because then you can play your auras, the 4-cost ones at least, off 1 card, which is
good point.
That's ideal.
Yeah, I didn't really. Yeah, it's crazy when you hear stuff like that. It's like I actually didn't think about it like that. When you say it, it makes so much more sense, right? Playing these auras off of 1 card is so superior when instead of it demanding 2 every single time. So that is actually a really cool interaction. And so what is in your opinion, I know we've mentioned Brute as kind of what you don't want to face, but is there anything else that Prism struggles against, and inversely, what does it excel against?
So basically, I think it struggles when it has to deal with 6 attacks, right? So I think obviously Brute is just the Nightmare matchup. My current the plan I'm currently on is basically try to get them to brick on their Scab Skins. So that's what, maybe a 15% chance to win if they roll a 1, and I think that's probably the best plan. But Guardian, I think, is also really difficult. I mean, I didn't look at in my first match against Kale, but I was getting pretty lucky. I was getting pretty ideal draws. And then I also got pretty ideal draws in my other top 8 match against Guardian, playing David Marshall as well. So, I think it's a hard matchup, and I think it's, that's something you maybe don't want to see. Also, Chain can be quite scary, just depending on how many kind of cards you have dedicated to playing against Chain, and how the opposing Chain player is playing the matchup as well.
Dan, can I ask, do you have any cards for specifically Chain in your deck?
Oh yeah. So after playing against Chain and finding it really difficult, I put 3 Herald of Judgment in, which is exclusively for Chain. I mean, that card is only good against Chain. Maybe Kano as well. And also I was at 3 Arclight Sentinels, which I don't know if that's correct. Maybe it should be 2. But that's also really, really good against Chain as well, because if they don't have a Time Snap Potion down, and you can Arclight Sentinel in response to their Soul Shackles going off, I think that's beginning of action phase, so I think you can do that. Then that you can brick their whole turn, and if they've got 4 or 5 Soul Shackles, then they're going to be taking quite a bit of blood debt and losing a whole turn's worth of tempo. It's pretty good.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And actually, you spoke about your Swiss match against Kale, and then if It's interesting. Then the final match was, really close game, I think, and a bit of a showcase of that matchup. I think of what we might see heading into this classic constructor format, but also from both Dan and Kale's perspective. One from Kale's perspective, I think, learning that matchup as the event went on. So obviously, played Dan, got pretty crushed. Adjusted somewhat and tried to play a bit differently in the top 8. And as you say, maybe Dan, your draws weren't quite as strong as they were in the Swiss. But it was a really interesting match. So if people haven't seen it, they can check that out on Dice Jar's YouTube. It's a very good finals game to watch.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think you kind of answered my follow-up question, which was, how good is Arclight Sentinel, and what situations should you be using it in?
Yeah, basically, I think it's good versus Brute, Chain, and Guardian. I actually think the game against Kale, I played really badly in the finals. I don't actually think it was that close. I think he had me crushed for a lot of that game. It just kind of didn't look like it because he was taking like a fair bit of damage. But I think that was reasonably calculated on his behalf. And I think, yeah, I've kind of changed my plan a little bit against Guardian. I think I was kind of being a little bit too aggressive with my auras in that final game, and I maybe needed to be kind of holding on to one and then playing them one after another in order to really get there. Or just to answer your earlier question, Brendan, in terms of things that Prism's good against, I think basically decks that aren't those three that I mentioned, ones that don't have a lot of 6 attacks, is where you really excel.
Yeah, so you think, so does Prism struggle against decks that maybe like Ninja, like Aggro Ninja, where, because it doesn't seem like Prism can block super effectively, right? Do they struggle from Katsu's hit triggers and fetching up more pieces and maybe presenting these large damage turns every turn, or how does that matchup generally go for you?
So I did a bit of testing. We actually had like a really cool Katsu list that Jason Long had come up with, and we were playing it into Prism. And Prism was just absolutely destroying it. It just felt like Ninja couldn't buy a win. So that's why Jason wasn't on Ninja for the winner case. But yeah, I mean, so obviously, like, you can't, you don't have a lot of armor, but you can have a little bit, and obviously a lot of your cards block 3, and you can have defense reactions. But also, like, you can just attack for 14 or 16 or whatever every turn,
Yeah.
and that's pretty good.
Yeah, we're talking about presenting a lot of damage, but the Katsu player may be presenting a lot, but Prism, like you said, 15 is not too crazy on a turn, and like you hit the 30 in your other game. But how do you think that Prism will fare against future lists that might include time skippers? So say a Guardian list that runs those time skippers, because when I noticed the game that Kale lost, he seemed to be kind of behind an aura the whole time, right? Like one aura too late. You had 2 out pretty early, and then it kind of seems like he spent all of his turns just attacking those auras, and was never able to attack at you. Where in the final, he was actually able to put pressure on you, and there wasn't an aura on the field every single turn.
Yeah, I think time skippers is probably pretty good in that matchup. I don't think it completely turns it around, but it does make it a little bit more awkward for the Prism player. I think so long as you're kind of like planning to chain auras together, as it were, then you can probably still have some reasonable matchup there. But yeah, obviously time skippers makes it a little bit worse for you. But it happens. Decks adjust. You can't just have people kind of not have tech view forever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an interesting card. I'm excited to see how it works out in that matchup. But what changes would you have made to that list that you brought to Dice Jar if you could, say, travel back in time right now?
So I think I would definitely play a second Ode to Wrath. I think that card really overperformed in the matchups where it was good. I think I'd cut Blinding Beam altogether. Partly because I didn't play any Brute. Now that I'm a time traveler, I can tell that I'm not going to play any Brute. But mostly, I just not play Blinding Beam. I think the card's actively not good in the build I was playing. I'd have an extra Ode to Wrath. Pummel was really good. I might have an extra Pummel. And I just play a little bit differently in the finals. Is the main thing I did differently. But I think those are the cards that I'd probably sort of change for that tournament.
Yeah, that Herald of Erudition Pummel combo is something that I think we'll learn to dread. It just reminds me of gives me PTSD from Command and Conquer Pummel and when Arcane Rising first came out. But yeah, that Herald of Erudition, getting go again, drawing those cards, just absolutely absolutely crazy. But Hayden, do you have any closing thoughts on Prism before we head into Shane?
I'm just interested to see what happens next with Prism. I think it's a really interesting class. Obviously, the one new class we have out of Monarch, and what people are going to do with it. I think Dan's sort of paved the way for players to take this list and potentially iterate on it, or look to even change it up completely with some of the things we talked about, whether it's a pure base control deck or even maybe even a pure aggro deck, whether they use Iris or Luminaris. So yeah, no, I'm just excited to see what happens next with Prism.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm going to leave this question open to both of you. Hayden, I'll let you take it first. But what do you think of Shane? So in my opinion, he seems very, very strong. The deck seems just incredibly explosive. Like, what are your first impressions of Shane's potential impact on the classic constructed meta?
I think Chain is very good. Yeah, I think the explosiveness that Chain has from the ability to play basically with a second hand almost with the Banish, it's really synergistic. A lot of cards are important to have to work well together, so you can brick some pretty bad flips off the top. You flip all non-attack actions or you flip all attack actions. It makes your turns pretty difficult. I think one of my things, and actually it's interesting, it was the preview card that I had and that we spoke about, Brennan, on our very first
busted.
sort of
it's busted
dimensional crossroads, which is a card that is really powerful, and I think isn't one-dimensional like maybe we thought it might have been when we initially saw the card. This can be played in aggressive decks. It can be potentially a pure win condition for control decks. So there's some really strong cards, and the effect that Chain has of give and go again and being able to play these cards from Banish is just there's so many possibilities because of the fact that you get to play with more cards and you can put more combinations of cards together. Basically, it's kind of my view on it.
And Dan, what are your thoughts on Shane?
So Chain's really interesting. I feel like there are kind of three ways of building, and maybe there's another one that focuses more on dimensional crossroads. But like it feels like there's kind of a get an arcane damage in and then benefit from that with sort of rip through reality and stuff. And then there's the kind of just generically good cards, sort of E-strikes, snatches, all that kind of stuff. We saw actually Matt Rogers was playing a list like that. I don't know if he ever got on coverage, but he was playing a list like that at the most recent Dice Jar. And then there's the kind of list that Jason Long was playing, which I really like. I have a massive soft spot for, which is kind of more like Riftbind centric. And then I suppose there's also the Dimensional Crossroads build as well. So there's like quite a lot of ways of taking them, and I think you kind of have to know what plan you're on. And I think sort of some of those plans are going to be best in Blitz, some of those plans are going to be best in Classic Constructed, and some of those plans are probably best avoided.
Yeah, for sure. And it's super, like, we'll get into this. I'm just going to jump to the final question here because I think it's like the biggest topic to talk about Shane is that Nebula Blade or Galaxy Black or Dread Scythe or Reaping Blade? Obviously I think it depends on your shell, but Hayden, why don't you go first? Like, talk about these weapons. Where do you see their power level lying? Which ones do you want to play? And just give me your impressions.
Yeah, I think they all do something very different, which is interesting. So we have four, like you say, 4 different weapons for Runeblade now, which is, or for Chain, which is pretty crazy. But I think the Dread Scythe, I think, is a very particular build. I think it's a very blue heavy build that's a lot more of a control deck. This could be more of what I was saying before with, Crossroads potentially being a win condition you use, or you actually work towards an in-game sort of stack. Dread Scythe is Runeblade, but not Shadow Runeblade, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think Dread Scythe potentially has a strong place in Viserai, but I'm not as high on it in any chain builds right now. I think Reaping Blade similar, doesn't present a threat. It's a lot more passive in what it does, but it does cost 1. But then you've got Galaxy, which you're always going to be able to turn on in these more aggressive chain decks, and then Nebula Blade, which I think, again, in aggressive decks, but also more mid-range builds of Chain is super effective because it gets to 4 damage, so it's always threatening this on-hit effect, but it just costs 1 more. So you just have to factor that in terms of, do you have the resources each turn to play this, to use it effectively, or maybe should you just be playing Galaxy Black, I think. Just depends on your deck setup, I think.
Yeah, and I think Dan. I'm gonna kind of put you on the spot as our local expert on Jason Long's deck because I know you guys tested a bit, so maybe you have some insight. So he was on the Galaxy Black. So walk me through that and yeah, like why that over Nebula Blade? Because I see you guys have Hal from Beyond, you have the full seed package, of course, and then you have a lot of dimensional cross. It seems like you have actors to work with in this deck.
So yeah, potentially. I think the main reason for it was that it costs one and still like potentially presents full damage. And just costing one is really, really good. I think there's a place for Nebula Blade. I played against, a chain player playing Nebula Blade on stream. But yeah, I mean, I don't know, the Galaxy Black's just cheaper. And you're not always short of resources, but sometimes you are, and you don't really ever want to miss an attack with your weapon if you can help it, unless you're, coming in with like double Riftbind or something with both your action points. So I don't know, it feels weak to ever miss coming in.
Yeah, and I think that what's important about Nebula Blade is that on-hit rune chant, right? And I see in your list you don't have a lot of cards that are going to benefit from that rune chant hitting, but if we talk about even some cards from Crucible, like Meet and Greet, so that's like a huge payoff that you can get from this rune chant hitting. Then obviously you have the new ones like Pierce the Shadow Eyes, you have Rip Through Reality. Those cards I'm not too high on, but things like Meet and Greet, just massive payoffs and just making your opponent kind of think about committing an entire card to blocking that arcane damage when they have so little information on what you're about to present, right? They don't know how wide you're going to go. They don't know how much arcane's coming in. And it's often, quite inefficient to commit an entire card to block one arcane damage. So it's this interesting mind game that you end up playing.
Yeah, I think one of the issues with Meet and Greet, and it's a card I've loved since it came out in Crucible, and I definitely was trying to play that in Viscerai builds and trying to build more aggressive Viscerai decks. And the fact that if you didn't hit, your opponent knew that, you wouldn't go again. So it was really easy to play around that card. And I think these chain decks with small instances of arcane damage that are a bit more incidental and your opponent doesn't necessarily face up know how much you're going to go for, it's so much harder to play around a card like Meet and Greet. So I think the strength of that card has just increased. And then Nebula Blade is just such a great pairing to it. So that's probably one of my favorite combinations is the Nebula Blade plus the Meet and Greet, I think. But again, these could be slightly different builds, and we're still working out what are the best combinations of cards, what are the best ways to attack this format, because we don't even know, what the meta game actually looks like yet.
Mm-hmm, for sure. And so I know you did a bit of testing with Jason's, Dan. So what were Shane's kind of like nightmare matchups? What did you never want to face as Shane? And then, on the other side of that coin, what were his really good matchups? Like, where was he favorable?
So I think, some of this is stuff we've done testing with afterwards and sort of testing, at the event. I feel like Ninja, especially if like your opponent is kind of, on a specific plan with Ninja, can be pretty difficult for at least our build of Chain, just because they can present a lot of damage quite consistently and reasonably early, and you have a bunch of bad block 2s in your deck. But apart from that, Guardian seemed a little bit tricky. We're kind of, just trying to come up with a new plan to deal with Guardian now. But yeah, that felt pretty difficult. That's what knocked out Jason after all. And also knocked out Matt Rogers also on a different chain list. And yeah, that feels like, they can come in with some cards that just stop you being able to play your game. It's pretty difficult.
Yep. Crush the Weak and Spinal, right? Or two that kind of, two of those marquee cards that just kind of screw up your turn, right?
Yeah, definitely. Although, if they hit you with a Crippling Crush, it crushes you just as much as anyone else.
It's not great, right?
Yeah, it's not good. I don't know, like Prism's kind of a messy one because it kind of feels a bit rough on both sides of it. And it really depends on, like, if they get in with a Herald of Judgment, if they hit Arclight Sentinel and you don't have, like, Time Snap Potion. Just lots of stuff like that, like, where it's kind of like, well, it feels a bit rough on either side. I'm not really sure, and I don't know if anyone is yet, who has kind of the edge in that matchup, but I think it really depends on who hits their good cards for the matchup and how the decks line up against each other, I guess.
Yeah, so just a quick anecdote from some of the testing that we've been doing over here in my group. We've actually had trouble with with the Bravo versus Shane matchup, but on the other side. So we run a quite a different list from what you guys are running. It does have the Nebula Blade, it does have the Meet and Greets, has the E-Strikes, stuff like that. But we've actually been struggling to win with the Bravo. Not impossible, but it seems like no matter who we threw on the Bravo player, we were kind of struggling versus that Shane, just because the damage output was a lot to deal with. And then after 4 to 5 shackles, it got to this extent where it was almost unblockable. One of those key cards being Dimensional Cross. Even in an aggro and mid range deck, it seems like if you plop that down on turn 1, it can end up getting in like 5 to 7 damage, which is just ridiculous. But yeah, it's been interesting. I know Hayden, you have some thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I've been similar to what Dan has been finding in the games I've played. Bravo is a hero that was actually the first hero I played in Welcome to Wraith when the game first came out, and as a hero I have a lot of affinity for. So gone back to it a little bit and played a few games this week with Bravo, and Chain seemed like a matchup I was really happy to be playing into. It seemed, like Dan said, whatever you crushed them with felt really strong. So me and Brendan have had a few discussions. So we might have to record a game and put it up on the channel, I think.
And I was telling Hayden, I was like, spark up that TTS boy. Let's see what you got. I don't know. It's weird. That's like something that we're kind of extensively trying to figure out right now. Honestly, I've totally outsourced this. I'm bringing in Kale this weekend just because I can't figure it out. Just gonna test it against the master himself.
I was gonna say, put your money where your mouth is.
Yeah.
As your as your chain player on Arcanite Skullcap, because that's like one thing that we weren't doing initially, and I think is probably
they are.
Yeah, I think that's probably a lot better. You need to be able to soak up like 2 crush hits, and then you're probably okay. It might make a massive difference, to be honest.
Yeah, but surprisingly, we are on Arcanite Skullcap and no Husk. Mostly because the overperformance of Dimensional Crossroads in that matchup, the Husk was sort of a liability. Although it could be a big tempo switch in the later game when you get closer to 13, you do use it. Just the Tunic resource also super important if you're running the Nebula Blade, and our deck in general is just a bit more expensive for that. So we ended up on Tunic, but the right choice could be Carrion Husk. Carrion Husk is just such an impactful card.
It's interesting. Crossroads is a card I felt in that matchup was definitely scary, which is odd because you're a really blue heavy deck, and it feels like it shouldn't be that scary of a card. But it's just the fact that it comes in for 2 damage, so you're expending a card for that, and then you're also trying to defend. And it means like you can't be as aggressive as probably you want to be in the matchup, which is actually I think what you want to be doing is finding those good crush turns, especially early game. So yeah, it was a card that I felt was actually quite scary in that matchup. Carrion Husk. So I had an opponent who played Carrion Husk, lost the Crossroads, and it just feels so, unsynergistic. Like it's pretty difficult.
For sure, yeah. I mean, they like directly kind of counter each other. It seems. Obviously, you could still make it work if you're super disciplined with the Husk, but yeah, the issue with the Dimensional Crossroads was, I mean, honestly, over like a decent sample size, like blocking arcane damage at all in that matchup just seemed like it wasn't the decision, because you just wouldn't have any cards to do anything on your turn, and then you have hit triggers coming at you anyway. Yeah. In the form of physical damage with the Nebula Blade, the Meet and Greets, the Command and Conquers. So it's like, am I actually going to pitch a card to block this one arcane? It's a weird little dance. But I just want to quickly kind of come back to a question here that I've been eagerly waiting to ask Dan. But so Dan, can you explain Mutated Mass to me, its use cases, and its best case scenario?
I mean, it's a blue that attacks for like 4 or sometimes 6. I mean, I don't really know what's to explain. The card's awesome, surely.
So with that one, like, I guess it's just been results oriented, right? We just haven't seen. I personally haven't seen too much success with it. When I saw it on camera, I don't think I ever saw it played at Dice Jar. So is it you are usually ending up on that 4 value?
Well, I mean, median? Yeah, 4 feels pretty doable, because I mean, obviously, like, you don't like necessarily with that, at least with Jason's chain deck, you don't necessarily want to be blocking that much in a lot of matchups, because a lot of your cards kind of block badly and pitch reasonably well. So you kind of want to be, after you've had a few turns, maybe you want to be kind of like throttling back on the blocking and probably pitching 2 or 3 cards a turn. And if they have, at least some of them have different costs, then you can be, probably it's a 4, it might be more, but also it's a blue. And like blue attack 4s it. I mean, that's great. That's ideal, surely.
And did Jason ever have a chance to summon Ursa? Did he ever play that Eclipse?
I'm not sure it was ever in his deck. I'm not sure about the like we kind of I think we put it in because oh maybe this is good and maybe it is because he does play quite a lot of Blood Deed cards so he can potentially do it but I'm not really sure what matchups you wanted in. You'd have to ask Jason that I think.
Yeah, for sure. I'm
I
super
think
interested. I'm excited to see it kind of be played. I literally have not seen it get summoned yet.
yeah, I have, and then that person lost the game. Uh, it's an interesting card. I think there's gonna be matchups where it's a card that you actively want, but I'm not I'm not sure. I'm on the same boat. I think you have to have a lot of blood to make it serviceable, and then it's not even necessarily exactly what you want in certain matchups.
Hmm. And yeah, for sure. But also, on the topic of of Shadow Heroes, as in Shane, we haven't seen any Levia yet. Do you think? I don't know if you saw that outside of coverage, Dan, when you played Dice Jar, or if you played it at your locals. But what are your thoughts on Levia and Classic Constructed? And do you think it, may have a chance to join the race?
Yeah, I mean, so I haven't played it at my locals. I have played it against Jason Long a little bit, and I've played it on like against people on Discord a little bit as well. And it feels like it has legs, right? It feels like you can do some powerful things. The blood debt thing is pretty easy to dodge, in classic constructed, and if you take a few points early on, it's not that bad. Um, it feels maybe a bit more consistent than Rhino. Like it doesn't have as big a turn where your opponent doesn't have a hand, but you can have sort of more consistent good turns. And I think if Prism becomes really popular, then Levia might be quite a scary matchup to play against, and might become good basically on the back of that, even if it doesn't already just on its own merits, which it might.
Yeah. And Hayden, I know you're a big Brute fan yourself. What are your thoughts on Levia?
I definitely am, but mostly a big Rhinar fan. So, Livia, I think is interesting. I think when the sort of cards came out, obviously Livia, one of the first heroes we saw there, first hero we saw. It felt like there wasn't a really clear picture of what you wanted to do, and probably in Classic Constructed. I think in Blitz, I think this hero is going to be pretty powerful. Actually, I think there's a lot of really cool interactions that work in a shorter format game. With a smaller deck. The brutes are really all about evasion. We've got Intimidate in Rhinar's form and Welcome to Wraith, and then here we've got this ability to give Dominate on your attacks, which come in the form of paying this cost from your graveyard, from setting up your graveyard. So I think Livia is going to see more play in Blitz, but I think there's probably, if the format changes to be a bit fairer, I think Livia has a chance. But I think when these decks are able to output so much damage, I just struggle to see where Livia's place might be, because you don't have necessarily the ability to just throw out as much damage as some of these other decks. But at least from what I've seen so far, I could be 100% conversing interactions, but dominate, things like that. When that's effective, then Livia probably has a position in the format.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And then I guess to get to our last hero, Monarch here, have you guys experienced any Bolton in Classic Constructed? I don't know if there was any played off cam, in Dice Jar, or your locals, or in testing. I'll let you kind of start this one off, Dan.
I've been testing with one of the boys, and he's been trying to make Bolton work, and it hasn't really. I think like he's kind of trying to get on like a full combo plan with Luminar Ascension and stuff, and just trying to attack a ton of times with weapons in one turn. And I think there's something to that, but it might be more of a blitz strategy than a classic constructed one, because then if you execute your combo, you can actually attack them for their whole life total rather than just some of it, which is obviously a lot better. So I think my experience so far with Bolton is that he might be pretty good in blitz.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question for you, Dan. Which weapons is one of the boys running?
So he was on the sword that attacks for 0, but I think that's basically just wrong, and he should be on the
Raiden.
thigh weapons. What are they called?
It's the sabers for the one-handed, and then the Soy Talks for 0 is Raiden.
Yeah, Raiden and Centauri sabers. That's what I mean.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I have seen this deck played out, and was actually pretty impressed with what one of the local guys here in Sydney, who's part of our our playtest group for limited format for the callings, who is a good player as well. So I think has an understanding, very good, I think, deck builder. So he's put together a Bolton deck which utilizes Raiden and was quite scary, to be honest. There were some really big turns that came out, but even the off turns where he was sort of building that soul actually felt pretty scary. So I was really impressed by what Raiden can do, especially with cards like Lumina and Veer the Vanguard and 20 Blade. Actually, as well, 20 Blade felt super scary in that deck. So yeah, I think it has legs. I'm not sure if it'll end up being that Raiden's necessarily the right one, but that build did feel scary. Maybe there is, an Axis build. Maybe there's a Centauri Sabers build. So I do feel like it does fall into a camp of an aggro deck, probably more so than a combo deck. But yeah, I'm hoping to be proved wrong on that one.
Yeah, so in our local meta out here, which is a bit underdeveloped compared to APAC, but I've seen it a bit. It just seems like it struggles being pressured, just because it needs so many resources to kind of enact its game plan. If it's on a mid range, like kind of aggro game plan, doesn't seem like it performs very well when a lot of hit triggers come its way and is trying to block efficiently. But yeah, I mean, I've seen the deck be pretty explosive. And of course, we've seen it in Blitz in the Gauntlet, where you can't just kind of present lethal on turn 0, turn 1, things like that. Mm-hmm. So pretty explosive hero.
It's interesting. I actually think I do think it's good in Blitz, and I know there's some builds that are starting to float around in Blitz. I actually think in Class Constructed though, it's almost like the perfect. It might be too long a game, but Blitz feels too short a game to be able to set up your soul. Because that's when you can do some really powerful things. I mean, you're probably the best Cataclysm deck, I think. Maybe Prism will argue with you. You also have Bolting Blade as well. There's some really powerful attacks that if you have time to get into the mid game, that the deck can put out. And then you start pressuring these decks for some really scary turns, as well as so having some combat tricks. And then you can always play cards like Soul Shield if defending is an issue for you in certain matchups, or Shunt, maybe Springboard Somersault. So and a lot of your cards, the majority of your cards defend for 3. I think probably in the builds that are going to be most viable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm interested to see the impact. Obviously on Classic Constructed, but kind of in my immediate experience will be in these like future gauntlets. I think we will see quite a bit of Bolton being brought. We're already seeing the impact of Shane on that format, which has been very strong so far. But yeah, just moving into like a full macro perspective. Dan, what do you think about the existing heroes prior to Welcome to Wraith, and how do you think that prior to Monarch, and how do you think the meta has shifted already?
I think the main shift is I think we're going to be seeing a lot less dash and a lot less of the kind of like doing things that are just kind of consistent and not very necessarily proactive. And I think that's basically a really good thing. I think having more proactive games, having more kind of like, okay, I've got a plan, I need to execute on this plan, and then my opponent's either trying to disrupt that or get their plan off better, is going to be just a more fun environment, and it's going to lead to also slightly shorter games, which is nice generally. And I think that's going to be one of the main shifts. Apart from that, I mean, obviously, some of the heroes have picked up a few new tricks. Ninja can play Belittle now, which seems pretty good. There's a few cool new warrior cards that Dorinthia can make good use of. Plow Through, I think, was one that was pretty scary. And then obviously, like Guardian, I think has picked up a ton more meta share because because obviously Dash was kind of its kryptonite.
Outmuscle and Rouse the Ancients being great additions to that deck as well.
Yeah, for sure, and potentially obviously Time Skippers as well when you want it.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I think basically a bunch of the decks have gotten better, and then maybe Dash and maybe one or two others have maybe gotten a bit worse. And that's interesting. That's cool. It's really nice to see some nice meta shifts. I'm hoping there'll also be some meta shifts in Blitz. Mostly, I hope that Ira will lose meta share. I think a lot of people are.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with you there. But I do think that dash control is dead. Like I aggressively unsleeved that deck after Monarch dropped because you just cannot have a. You need to be proactively doing something to your opponent. You can't just sit back and try to block out every turn or try to. Just this like dirtling and getting items just is not a thing versus Prism, who does 15 and sometimes 30, like you said, damage to you like every turn. We see Shane just presenting 15, 20 damage every turn. It's just how do you can't really do anything against that, it feels, if you're playing mech, if you're just giving them a full hand every single turn. And then, but past that, I do think that maybe dash mech, dash slash like, not dash, boost, boost, or mid range dash could come back into the meta and have like a strong showing.
Yeah. If anyone's ever read any of some of the, I guess, budget deck lists or sort of entry level deck lists that I've published in the past, either on Channel Fireball or other sides, I've always been a big advocate of boost mech. I think the deck is a really good starting point for a player. It's super fun. You get to chain these really big attack turns together. The problem prior was probably you struggled to get through the control mech decks, and warrior was a problem for you. But I think that deck has like a lot of potential now. Super fun. Get to max velocity some people. And it's just, it's got some powerful interactions. But I think you're so right, Brendan. The ability to present damage and set up game structures we've seen that as the game has progressed from Welcome to Wraith through to Arcane Rising through to Crucible and now to Monarch, just get more and more and more now until we're actually at this real critical mass of cards and now new heroes with strategies that actively want to be setting up these turns. And there was decks already in the meta that could do that in Crucible. People weren't necessarily going for those decks because, Mechanologist or the sort of classic Dorinthia builds were, they were easy entry points and they were fairly straightforward game plans to play. But now you can't really get away with those as much. You actually do need to be starting to think about these big setup turns or decks, or have these long game strategies. So I think that's super exciting. I think in terms of, I'm just going to build on what Dan said from a meta perspective. I think a deck like Rhinar gets a little bit worse. I think Rhinar was really well positioned in the previous format because there was a lot of decks trying to do consistent things. And Rhinar likes playing against decks that are, trying to do more sort of fair things, because Rhinar can take away their hand and not allow them to defend with 2 cards and attack with 2 cards, which is really powerful. But when an opponent wants to attack with 4 or 5 cards every turn, that's not so great for Rhinar. The Intimidate effect becomes basically useless. And your damage is so much lower than these other decks. So I think Rhinar takes a bit of a hit, and what we're seeing the meta start to shape up could change. And of course, as you said, Mechanologist. Ninja's an interesting one. I actually think Katsu was really well positioned in the previous format as a deck that was a really good foil to Mech as a aggressive ninja decks, which we didn't actually really see people play, but I definitely was a big proponent of those decks. Plunder runs and Art of War Katsu decks that were just really low to the ground, I think was a great way to combat the mech control decks. And I think those get hurt a little bit. I think you get Belittle and Minimalism, which is really cool, but these decks that like Prism can hurt you, and even Chain might be a close matchup. But yeah, I think Ninja might take a little bit of a knock with it not having Mechanologist to prey on as much.
So I'm going to slightly disagree with sort of disagree with Hayden here. And that, like, I agree with him on Rhinar, but, like, depending on how much meta share Prism takes up, Rhinar might maybe sort of find a new spot, even though, obviously not having Dash to prey on is a big hit. But I think Ninja might actually be better positioned than he's anticipating, just depending on how much of the meta is taken up by Chain. Because I think, like, a really aggressive Ninja deck can be really difficult for Chain because you're putting on heaps of pressure from turn 1 rather than from turn sort of 3 or 4.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'd be interested to see what happens there. I think if Dorinthia gets played a lot less as well, the aggro ninja deck you're probably a lot more favorable to play that deck as well. So yeah, it could actually end up being that. I think maybe I wasn't necessarily saying it's going to see less play. I think I think the ninja aggro deck was really well positioned and people just didn't play it. I think it might be slightly worse positioned, but people might play it more.
Yeah,
effectively.
I think one thing that's really cool about this is we might start to see sort of more kind of meta shifts rather than like necessarily people playing the same decks week in and week out.
Yeah, for the
More
whole
kind of
set.
like
Yeah.
yeah, like Prism's rising now, and now so like Rhinar gets better, and then obviously like that makes Chain a lot better, which makes Ninja a lot better, which makes Prism a lot better, and you might see kind of more meta shifts, tournament to tournament even.
Yeah, I think as well because we're just going to see more players into the game, more minds out there talking about the meta, and I think we're more events. We're going to see an adaptive shift a lot more, which is we didn't necessarily get with Arcane Rising and then Crucible, unfortunately. But I think we will definitely see it.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. This kind of dynamic shifting meta seems like what we're going to experience. Obviously, we're very early in building the decks, so maybe kind of some of the more optimal stuff hasn't been found, or almost certainly it hasn't.
No, definitely not.
But that would be kind of a nice breath of fresh air to kind of have these this sort of dynamic meta where you're gonna have to really make calls and reads on what you expect to show up to X tournament, and then choose your deck based off that. But kind of closing out here a bit, what cards from the past do you think really rose up with the release of Monarch? So stuff from Welcome to Wraith, Arcane Rising, or Crucible of War.
I was just going to add actually onto the last point. We didn't talk about it. Well, we've kind of talked about it through the pod, but I think Bravo rises up as well. Obviously less mech.
Yeah.
Some new cards like you spoke about, Outmuscle and Rouse the Ancients is actually, that card is just super good, and something that deck kind of needed as well. So excited for that. And then I wonder, I actually think Azalea, to be honest. I'm going to say the dirty word, and our listeners might turn off right now, but I think Azalea's on-hit effects, most of them, or in fact all of them, are super relevant against Chain, for instance. So Azalea could be a great way to attack potentially Chain-dominated meta.
We're telling jokes now, huh?
Well,
Is that what's going on?
maybe. I'm just there's I'm not saying that you should be going and putting cards like Memorial Ground or anything into your deck, but I think there's potential for Azalea to finally be playable. I won't say good. I'm going to say playable.
So I didn't catch any of that, Hayden. I just turned off my speaker as soon as you said Azalea. What?
And that might be the reaction, but you know what? Maybe I'll have the last laugh. We'll see what happens. I wouldn't say that I'm Azalea's number one fanboy, but I think just looking at, if I just read some of the cards that Azalea has, and then I read what Chain does, and I go, okay, some of these line up reasonably well. So we'll see what happens.
That perfectly leads into our last question here, because this is a funny question, by the way, Dan. So don't take it too seriously. But if you had to choose right now for this constructed season, let's say, I don't know, the next couple of months, right? If you had to choose a deck, or not even a deck, but a hero to play and to commit to, what would you choose? Hayden, you do not get an answer because you're locked into Azalea. We'll see you at that PTI event. Yep. But Dan, what's kind of, I know you had success with Prism, but is that what's standing out to you at this point?
Well, at the moment, I reckon I've done a lot more testing with Prism than most other things. So if I had to choose now, it would be Prism. But there's a few sort of testing games I want to get in over the next couple of days with Chain to just kind of see how the Guardian matchup goes, see how the Prism matchup goes. And so if you ask me in a couple of days, my answer may or may not change to Chain. But yeah, Hayden, I really hope you make day 2 of the call-in, because otherwise it's going to be Azalea on day 2.
That's fine. I at least I didn't hard claim that I was going to play Azalea like Brendan has hard claimed that Prism is his main for this format. That's all I'm saying.
I think Dan would agree with me. It wasn't a bad call, so we're okay over here. But no, I'm really liking how Bravo's doing. I was really impressed by how it performed in the Dice Shark games, but obviously piloted by Kale, who's one of the best Bravo players in the world. I mean, he's been playing it literally since 2019, but was really impressed with his play in the final game, and I just like the look of the deck. And I think it looks a lot more fun than it did back when I first was playing with it, which is in Welcome to Wraith, where I thought the deck was just kind of boring. But it also is just, it had a really, really bad matchup versus like Drone, Ninja. But yeah, I mean, once well positioned, that deck seems like it's super solid, and it kind of aligns with my, core tenet of deck selection, which is consistency. So I'm liking the look of it. But then I also, like I told you, like we've been testing with Shane, and it's an absolute monster. Like it's been winning a lot. So who knows? Right now, Shane could just kind of take it away, but
Yeah.
early days, I'm totally aligned with Dan in the sense that if you asked me in a week, it would change, right? But I'm really excited for Guardian.
Well, I don't get a
All
say
right.
apparently, so I don't want to.
No, you're an Azalea player. You're a part of that club now that plays Azalea.
I was going to say, make sure, Brennan, that you obviously you're working at that chain matchup, and make sure you know how that plays into Prism, so that when you're playing Prism, the next 6 months, you know what's going on. Very important.
This is just, I mean, this might be, something to cut, but me and Hayden, so Hayden sort of taught me the game in a lot of ways. And he kept trying to convince me that Azalea was good. He'd be like, oh, here's my Azalea list. I think it's pretty good.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I think basically every time we played, I beat him. And there were, I think at the time, my only times I beat him was when he was trying to show me how good Azalea was.
If I remember correctly, Hayden, you wrote like an entire masterclass on Azalea. Like, there's a novel out there.
That's true. Yeah. I wanted to go hard mode for 3 months, and I did, and it was fun and really challenging and hard to win games, but
You just picked a hero random, you just rolled those dice, and just 2 1s came up, and you got Azalea.
I think basically Snake Eyes Azalea. No, I rolled double 6, obviously. I think to be honest, the reason, and just in all seriousness, I think Azalea was 100% the worst class in the previous meta, in Arcane and in Crucible. But I do genuinely think that some cards in this format come up a lot. Whether that means that because the cards come up, things like Sleep Dart, like Red Ledger, just because they come up, does that mean the class is now good? I don't think so, but there is an interesting factor that the overall power of that class in this probable meta is going to be better.
Yeah.
It's not
I'd
a cop
say
out,
that's
it's true.
that's pretty much the meme of Monarch for me. Is like every time something we talk about like a new hero, someone goes, Sleep Dart would be really good versus this, and everybody goes, what the who's this guy?
Hey, don't sleep on Sleep Dart, you know what I'm saying?
All right, well, we're kind of getting off topic, so we'll tie it off. But Dan, thank you so much for joining us this week. It was super awesome to kind of get in your mind, get in the cutting edge of the classic constructed meta. It's super interesting, where you've been able to take Prism, watching it perform on camera. I think, particularly for me, the way that the auras kind of stood out in your matches versus Guardian was fascinating. And then obviously there's so much more potential with Shane, Bolton, and Levia. So much more to be explored. But just want to thank you again, Dan, for coming on.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure to be here. I mean, I've been, sort of hitting Hayden up. I've been like, look, what kind of event do I have to win in order to get a guest spot on your sweet new podcast? Basically since before, the first episode dropped. And yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, and it turns out you didn't win anything, but that's okay. Well, we've had you on anyway, so.
Oh man! All right, so I know that we called it the correspondence section this week, but it's been officially renamed to either Sweat and Blood or Command and Cookout. It's going to be where you can send your questions. Hey, why don't you tell people how to get their questions put on the pod?
Yeah, 100%. So yeah, I forgot that we workshopped the name, so I have to work on that for next week. Dan, if you've got a suggestion for the correspondence section and name, we'd love to hear it. But otherwise, yep, if you want to send your questions in, they can go to arsenalpassfab@gmail.com. Email will be in the show description for YouTube, for Spotify, Podbean, Apple, wherever you listen to it. There'll be a description there. Send us your questions. What do you want to know? What would you like me and Brendan to answer, or our guests on the show as well? We'd love to hear it. Again, thanks to Fu, who had a question for us this week.
Yep. And I know I got to play the role of host today. Just pretend, but Hayden, why don't you close this out in classic fashion?
Classic fashion.
Yep.
Well, we'll say bye.
All right, everyone. That's been episode 7 of Arsenal Pass. We'll see you next week.